Q&A here. So I'm going to bring up another Carla, which is rare, Charla, and I'd like
We have two Carlas and a Charla.
Yes, so it could be a little complicated. I'm going to ask a couple questions. You guys will ask a couple questions, and then we'll go ahead and go out and mix and mingle again. So Charla, I'm going to have you actually introduce yourself. Quick 30 seconds.
Charla Triplett. I run a healthcare accelerator at Expert Dojo, and also am a managing director of a venture firm, SunCoast Ventures. And I also have an AI startup.
Great. Carla?
Hi everybody, Carla Leibowitz. I lead business and corporate development at Flatiron Health, and in the past I worked at AI companies that spearheaded FDA clearances in radiology and pathology. So the first clearance that you saw in Renee's chart, that was Arteris in early 2018. Happy to talk about that too.
Great. All right, I'm going to start with a couple questions here. Can you share some insights around how companies mitigate fears about AI and how we can ensure that it is used responsibly and ethically in the future? Go for it. I'm getting mic'd up.
One of the biggest things I think that's really important in this area, just like we have issues in clinical trials and diversity, I think if we're not generating data from diverse patients in medical solutions, then that is going to create the same kind of mistrust that we currently have in the clinical trials field. So I think that's one area that we need to really focus in on.
Yeah, I think it's all about how you validate your product, whether it's a black box or it's explainable or whatever kind of people don't understand about it. If you validate your algorithm in the population that it's meant to serve and you show that it works well on patients from different hospitals, different races, different ages, that's what matters at the end of the day. And so really think at the beginning of your development how you're going to validate this and prove this to physicians or patients or whoever's going to use it, that it's actually giving you the right answer.
Along those same lines, how can companies ensure that their AI systems are secure and compliant with data privacy regulations, as you mentioned, HIPAA and others? Okay.
Yeah, I think it starts from how you build your systems from the start. If you try to become HIPAA compliant or SOC 2 compliant or GDPR compliant retrospectively, you're going to have to break your product and tear it apart and build it again. So if you know that you need to comply with those regulations and you should be aware of what the regulations are in the geographies that you want to play in, you need to design to them from the start. And it's getting easier because there's a lot more companies that have experience on them. A lot of the clouds now have partitions that meet those regulations, but you need to know what you're getting into at the beginning, otherwise it's going to be pretty painful.
I can share a specific example, just learning from some of the startups. There's this one startup that do end-to-end kind of video analytics and speech AI in the hospitals to be able to detect patient fall, etc. One of the example that they gave was that when they had to detect the surgery length, the beginning and the end, using cameras in the hospital, of course that may involve patient privacy. So the approach that they build into the AI algorithm is from the get-go, they will actually be blurring out the patient image because you actually know the patient is always going to be on the bed, nowhere else, right? So if you have that built in, it actually sometimes can help alleviate some of those challenges. And AI is a new space. We got to be thinking through a lot of the corner cases. And also some of the endoscopy startups, when they get the camera into your body, and they even were building AI algorithm as soon as it comes out, cut. So they don't have to have any chance of having to go back to the video and cut out any parts of the video that perhaps included patient privacy data. So those are all things that previously when we don't have AI, we don't think about it like that. But when you do have AI, think about what are some of the stuff that may be corner cases or unique cases that you should build it in early on from a technology perspective.
Great. Do you have any specific strategies for companies to ensure that they remain competitive in this fast-moving AI-driven space?
Yes, I think besides a lot of the new stuff that's coming out, a lot of the traditional AI, because the tech giants are actually giving it out there for open source and free out there, so it's quickly becoming a commodity. The ones that's going to hold on to data is going to be the king in the space. So number one, figure out your data engine. If you're not the one that's going to be generating data, that's going to make sense. Definitely make sure you're working with the right pharma, the right providers to get the right data for your AI algorithms. And then on top of that, compute really does help. Not to try to pitch because I'm NVIDIA, but a lot of the startups are looking for GPU availability in the cloud on-prem. Given supply chain is a global issue, anyone that has happens to do something, be able to, I don't want to say hoard, but a lot of them do actually, it will be able to be in more advanced compared to competitors, because they will be able to run millions of experiments in a week compared to others that are trying to wait for one experiment to finish in a month. That kind of a speed, it's just gonna make the competition even more severe in the near future. Yeah, and then I think if you do have the luxury, if you can drink your own champagne, is a good way too. That means that if you're building it, if you have internal stakeholder that will use it, you have a higher chance that they are gonna give you very, very good feedback. NVIDIA will actually take the same approach. A lot of the solution we first put out there, our CEO Jensen will be like, do you have internal stakeholders that actually want to use your solution? When it makes sense, like increasing operational efficiency, etc. So that could be actually another good way to do. So you're not just building things and hoping a customer will come.
Don't underestimate human factors. I would say don't underestimate human factors. If you see the explosion of GPT3, it was not the first generative AI large language model out there. If Gmail has been suggesting the end of your sentences, it's been out there for a while, but they made it so fun to use that it went crazy, right? So same thing for medical devices. If a physician has to click 20 times instead of 2, they're not going to want it. They're going to say this takes more time. It doesn't save me any time, even if it's more accurate. So I would say AI is a part of a product, but it's not the whole product. And you definitely want to think about it that way.
So I do a lot of keynotes inside of pharmaceutical companies, and I have one coming up for Takeda. And one of the things that I'm going to be talking about is for them to start thinking about digital therapeutics, but don't jump in right now, because this is something that can be very targeted towards an actual medication. And I'm saying to them, watch the other people and see what works. Watch what's working for Twill, watch what's working for Pear, and then jump into the game in a couple of years, because it'll be a lot easier that way.
I just had one more thought, and that is, similar to any other startup, it's like figure out how your business model is going to work and how you're going to make money. So I see a lot of folks in AI saying, but I've got this customer, and I see 10 companies doing the exact same thing, and they all have $500K from pharma, and it's yeah, but who is going to win that battle? And also, ultimately, how are you going to make money? Because it's cool, it's buzzy, it's hot right now, but it also needs fundamentals. So as an investor, what I'm looking for is real applications that fit into the clinical workflow and that actually are going to be able to make money. So
what challenges do you anticipate in the development of AI over the next 1 to 2 years?
I think a lot of similar challenges today. Not readily available good data, clean data. Compute is still going to be probably a challenge, and a lot of privacy concerns still going to be there. I think given how powerful generative AI could be, a lot more ethical concerns with powerful tools will surface as well. So I think those are, in the next 1 to 2 years, we'll still see a lot of the problem. Hopefully we're not going to experience another pandemic, but that will be another set of problems and opportunities too.
So I'll say at Flatiron, we have really good data. But it's EMR data with some genomics and some imaging data. It's not what you expect. It's not the holy grail of I have all the data beautifully curated and everything makes sense, right? And this took 10 years to build. I would say another challenge, even if you find good data sets, is diversity. I'm really glad we're focusing on it now, because a lot of the early AI products out there were really only built on data from academic medical centers without a lens of diversity, and then it turned out they didn't work for the general population. I would say the other one is just volume, right? There's so many companies building such similar products that there's a lot of chatter out there. So really thinking about how you're going to get to market and how you're going to differentiate is going to be hard because data is easier to get now. Even there is data out there, it's easier to get. It's hard to get enough data, enough diverse data. So federated learning is a good solution in some cases. But I would say competition is going to be pretty intense.
So on that note, there are so many startups out there, as you just mentioned. If you were to keep your eye on one startup, what would you recommend?
Want to go first?
This is hard because I have a lot of as we call them, ducks out of
You get
the
two.
Okay, I
You
get
have
two.
two.
I just have an only child, so that's it. So there's two I want to highlight for different reasons. One is the topic that was brought up earlier in vocal biomarkers. So I've invested in a company in this space. What I love what they're doing is supporting clinicians in treatment in people with severe mental disorders, so schizophrenia and bipolar, and it's allowing docs to have objective data around that. And I just, for me, like that's a tremendous solution. The second, also an investor in, and she's doing gut microbiome using machine learning, precision recommendations, and mapping food bioactives. And for me, she's already able to help support women with PCOS and get them completely off medication. She's not technically a digital therapeutic yet, but we're moving her down that track. So I would say digital therapeutics and precision and predictive stuff is where we're looking at.
I met with this company just this week. I met with this company just this week. There's a company called Symbiosis, and I thought that they have a really interesting approach to trying to predict what therapies are going to work for specific patients based on medical imaging and a few other data pieces from that patient. And their approach is really, really different from many others that I've seen. So I'm going to keep an eye on them.
I like that one too. We work with them on a bi-weekly basis. Very, very smart people, like 30-some PhDs in that small startup. They're just fantastic. I guess I'll pick in silico medicine, and they represent something that's interesting trend. Of course, a lot of startups, come and go. And they not only built a platform for AI for drug discovery, and they figure out a lot of things for like clinical trial, but I think it was this week, they just announced something that they're going to go into robotic labs as well. That trend is very interesting because a lot of, maybe you guys were following, I think 2 years ago in the UK academic medical center there, they actually have robots to help with the test tube as well. And then they were training the robots first in the virtual environment before building it. So that type of tech savvy, forward looking in tech bio space is pretty exciting. So I think there's going to be more of those coming, and hopefully we'll see great traction in that space too.
So beyond companies like Alacrity Care, which is the remote patient monitoring for oncology clinical trials, one of the startups that I am just absolutely in love with right now is Prenuvo. Raise your hands, how many people have heard of Prenuvo? Oh my gosh, only like one or two. Okay, so it's direct to consumer, full MRI, body and head scan. It checks for 500 different conditions, including early stage pancreatic cancer, early stage lung cancer, and aneurysms, which is a really big deal. But they've built a number of AI tools behind the scenes. And because they only use it internally, they don't have to go through FDA clearance. And so they have some cool AI tools around automatically numbering the vertebrae and making it easier for radiologists, but also measuring exactly your visceral fat and measuring exactly the size of every single one of your organs. And so going back to that longitudinal health data that I kept mentioning in my keynote, you get to compare year over year and see if there's tiny little infinitesimal changes, so you can catch diseases 10 years before you actually start to feel a symptom. And the thing is, if you're not familiar with MRIs, there are 0 side effects, right? This is not a CAT scan, this is an MRI. Easy to do, and there's one in Redwood City I would highly recommend. I'm doing it every year, and I was so excited about it that they actually put me in their television commercial.
I just realized I did not give the names of my two startups, so I would like to plug them real quick. Better Meal AI and Signal Fusion. So Better Meal is obviously the food related, and the other is the vocal bio.
I do a plug for her too. This group of venture team is very different. They're so hands-on with their startups. You guys are fantastic. You guys should come learn about the Dojo expert that they are working on. It's really great. I love startups that are part of their team.
So who's part of a startup in here? All right.
Okay.
So why don't we open this up to you guys? Like, who has a question? And you can just stand up, say your name, and ask your question.
Sure, okay. Well, I'll be first, I guess. Hi everyone, I'm Caroline, and thank you first of all to Carla and the panelists. Super great, I learned so much. My question, I have two parts. So first is a little bit personal because my company, NoTex, we're automatically creating visit notes, doctor visit notes from patient conversations. So I heard a lot about vocal biomarkers, I heard a lot about imaging. I guess I'm just curious to understand what you all are excited about in the conversation space, because I feel like the patient conversation is still so untapped and rich and really a data mine that could still be used. So curious on that. So that's the first question. And any kind of like interesting speech AI algorithms there. And then second of all, I'd love to know how, big enterprise players like, big tech companies like NVIDIA or big EMR companies or, big data repositories like Flatiron, what you guys are doing to kind of, pay it forward to the startup community and in terms of data interoperability. So just curious if you guys have those data sets, but us startups out here, we're trying to get more data, trying to get more access, that stuff to train with. So curious about the opportunities there.
Good.
So I'll take the first one. Ellipsis Health is one of the vocal biomarker companies that is actually analyzing in real time, right? The doctor visit between the doctor and the patient. So that is going on. I expect vocal biomarkers to explode over the next 5 to 7 years. And one of the big companies that's going into it, or is already into it, of course, is Amazon. So they have their Halo wearable that the first thing it was able to do was emotion monitoring. And so, yes, I think that's going to absolutely explode. The other thing around that is that we see companies that are able to, or research studies that can tell if someone is suicidal by the way that they write their text messages. And that's pretty amazing because they're not talking about suicide, but they can tell by the way that they are doing their speech.
Yeah, about speech AI, another one that maybe check out at NVIDIA that we have is Riva. It's also free. It's the most customizable one. So, and I think compared to a lot out there, I know Google, AWS, everyone else is probably from the big tech are all putting something out there like that you can leverage and play around with it to see which one works for your use case. There's definitely a lot of healthcare startups are also using something like that. That was your first question. Oh, paying forward about data. We actually don't have data. NVIDIA, we don't hold on to the data. We work with academic medical center, like a lot of the models we end up releasing out there, we sign data agreements with like NIH, having the identified patient data to work with under a very, very strict legal requirement on what we can do with that data for what purpose. And that's why earlier when I say the generative AI challenge number 2, how you work with academic data, it's lots of constraints. So even when we release model out there, how is the model going to be used? You really should read all of the fine prints too, so you don't get into legal troubles in the future.
Comment on a couple things. Yeah, I was going to comment on a couple things. I would say, if you're recording conversations with patients and doctors, you need to start thinking about medical legal risk. There's a lot of things that don't get recorded in healthcare because hospitals and doctors don't want to be sued. So it's not as simple as recording the conversation and plopping it somewhere. This is why companies that are abstracting medical visit notes have very, very well trained people doing that. On the data side, I would say, I'll speak for Flatiron. One of the things my team does is build partnerships with AI companies. We don't give away data because that's our lifeblood, but we have partnered with different AI companies in different ways, and some startups do purchase our data. It's just we need to have a conversation about what data you're looking for and what data we have, etc. We don't limit who we work with based on size. We are exploring a lot of things that we may not want to build ourselves as well. So yeah, I would just say it never hurts to have a conversation.
There are data as a service companies out there. They're able to sign agreements with providers for certain sets of data to be used for other people. So look it up. There's definitely quite a few companies that we have looked into too.
It's a really tricky area you're in because I funded a company that's trying to generate medical coding from actual conversations as well. And I think, that's where like 25% of where our healthcare spend goes. So we can fix those errors and docs burn out because of these things. So it's in a very important area, but it's hard to get that data that is the true conversation that comes from the doctor-patient interaction. There's lots of other data sets out there, but it's already basically been put into EMR, which is not as useful, I think, for what is it. So I don't have a solution for you, but I know your struggle because I've been working with a startup that's in a similar space, and it's not easy to find that data set, and we've looked. So.
Another quick
Thank
question.
you all, by the way. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Monica. I'm in the clinical space, so I'm a physician. This question is for Carla and everybody. First of all, not enough Carlas out there. Name your name is Carla. My question is from, you guys all addressed it, but I think you specifically addressed it in terms of diversity within the clinical space and data-driven diversity. There are certain fields, mental health, fertility, dermatology, I can go on, that notoriously have less of diversity within the field, be that financially, information driven, whatever. What is your hypothesis from the tech and AI side for how to accumulate data and change that? Not on the clinical side, we're doing our best, but on your side, how are you guys approaching, you said find specific providers, right? What is that, if you don't mind fleshing that out a little bit, what does that mean?
Before you answer, I just want to tell everyone, so Monica is a very good friend of mine, and she is literally one of the top fertility doctors in the country. And she yes. So if anyone wants to get pregnant, she knows how to do that really well.
This is an increasing trend, by the way, because women now, we have like so much power in terms of money and the timeline on our fertility, and it's a problem that I see an increasing trend of more solutions and more innovation is coming into this space because we not get to control what our family will be like in the future. Yeah, so thank you for doing that very important work for the rest of us.
Yeah, I think this is an area where the startups that are going after digital health and rural health are really going to bring some of this data to light. So I see that there's a huge trend or push towards the social determinants of health and also focusing in on bringing these telemedicine and other digital solutions into the rural communities and other places that don't have, that have different demographics. And I think that may help solve some of those.
I think you guys are going to be instrumental in that because I think we're doing everything we can, and I think the next push has to be financial and data, maybe even overload, but from an outside source that's not clinical.
So I think there's a couple of different pieces here. The FDA has started to demand diversity in data when it's submitted. At my last company, Page, when we got the first AI for pathology approval, we ran this data. Our data was mostly trained on Memorial Sloan Kettering images, but then we got data from about 140 hospitals from all around the country and some 80 hospitals outside of the US with a representative data sample, and that's hard. But we wanted to show that this works for everyone, especially because sometimes cancers present differently in different races. The second bit is you'd really want to go outside of your academic medical centers. That's one of the reasons I was excited about joining Flatiron, because most of our data comes from community oncology clinics. And that's where diversity comes from, and that's also where you can make the most difference with AI solutions that might help doctors make decisions or that might help patients get tested with the right test at the right time. But again, there is a growing number of startups, and we're in oncology, but there's other startups that are similar to Flatiron that are in other fields, and you really want to look for them because they're already working with some of these smaller, more distributed rural clinics. But I think a lot of those physicians are very excited about what they can bring and the patients they represent. It's not that they don't want to do research, they just don't have as much bandwidth, so you need to think about it a little bit differently.
Yeah. It makes sense. You have cancers that are ethnically skewed, right? You have to go to community clinics where you're getting that ethnicity more represented, and that's still, if you want to talk about diversity, that's still diversity, right? You have to account for that. So.
Yeah, and if you look at the other diversity demographic that a lot of people don't talk about. There's kind of income brackets, right? And
100%.
even if you have a diversity of races that going to an academic medical center, it's really rare unless they live in that city that you get lower income patients getting treated there.
Yeah, I'm looking to bring a startup into the dojo that's an in-between fertility solution. So it's a diagnostic and telehealth solution that's the sort of pre-IVF. And I love that because to me, what I see is like that's a different level of outpouring of economic commitment to that. And so I think even the way that these solutions are being developed that are not just thinking about the higher end medical treatments first, especially in fertility, I think is important.
From big tech perspective, everyone's asking that question. It's a very well-aware challenge from data gathering perspective. So one is we want to select the partners that already have that as top of mind. Even within NVIDIA, we have this trustworthy AI group. So they actually have 7 guidelines on even part of how to build product, what sort of data to get in to make sure that it's diverse. I think even asking the question of what is diversity is very important because let's say that in US, if we consider in a certain area, Black population is minority. I went to Africa, that's their majority of their data, right? And then the radiologist there, one of the startup came to me and be like, Renee, I have all of this data, I don't know what to do with it. I was like, oh, can we figure out if we can take your solution global? Because when I went to Africa, I was the minority, but I'm a majority in Silicon Valley. So I think what does that diverse mean for your solution is also very important. So I think that's a question that we, as good citizen, overall putting out solutions early on in research, we're all asking that question.
I think this is where clinicians can be snooty, and I think they know best in a lot of manners, but I think this is where we can really rely on you guys to help us.
So I'll tell an anecdote. When a radiology team at Ohio State University was testing a solution that was created at MGH in Boston, they basically said, the idea is great, but I think it only works on skinny vegetarians from the coast. And so it was one of the early days of federated learning, and we were trying to show how you really wanted to train certain things on more diverse populations, but it was actually really funny how the model just fell apart on different patients that were just bigger.
I really think we can go on for hours here, but I think you have one comment
so,
here.
Thank you. This is amazing and great job, Carla. So I needed to put a plug for one of our clients in the data space. Monica has founded a company called Triplett in mental health that is in fact doing all of that on the social determinants, on the diversity and prediction of how mental health works and which drugs are going to be working correctly with the patient itself. So you guys hadn't heard about it, so I thought I should actually put a plug in. And thank you so much, Carla. What an amazing job.
Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you, panelists, speakers. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone in this room, for taking the time to be here tonight. We have some amazing people in the room working on like incredible healthcare problems, and so I encourage you all to go meet each other, introduce each other, and certainly get to know the panelists here. So thank you, and stay in touch with Healthtech Women for our next upcoming events here.
Amazing.